Okay. Shalom, I'm Dr. Yasapa. Excuse me. I'm Dr. Yasapa from Zion Law School. And today we're going to discuss the fact that being Black is a crime in the US. Okay, being Black is a crime in the US. Give me 1 second. Excuse me. All right. Excuse me. Okay, so here we go. This is going to be an article coming out of thought.com. Okay. And we're just going to read through the article and comment on it. This is important because the content that I've posted over the last, I guess, week or two has to do with status, right? Our status as the house of Yasharallah and who we are according to Genesis chapter 2, right? Who we are according to Genesis chapter 2. So go back and watch those videos. It is essential. It is of the utmost importance that you watch those videos so you can know who you are and what it means to you in your everyday life. Okay, that means law. Okay, what it means to you in law. And when you deny that or you reject it knowingly or unknowingly, okay, in other words, you are disrespecting your ancient foremothers and forefathers, which is in violation of Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. Let's go and read that, okay? Exodus 20, verse 12. Okay, you should know that this is the 10 Commandments, okay? So Exodus 20, verse 12. This is in the other videos. So go back and watch this. So you see this is the 10 Commandments. We'll go to verse 12. Excuse me. And it says here, honor your mothers and your fathers so that it may go, so that you may live long in the land that the Most High your power is giving you. Let me read that again. This is Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. I believe this is the NIV version. So it reads, honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land the Most High your power is giving you. Okay, so honor your ancient foremothers and forefathers. So let's put this in further text as review. Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. Again, it's probably going to be, yeah, this is the NIV. Looks like the NIV. That's usually what comes up at the top. And we'll look at verse 7, right? So take a look at verse 7, everyone, scholars. All right, it reads, and the Most High formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Now, in Christianity, in religion, you were taught that the most important part of that verse was that the Most High breathed breath into the man's body and he became alive. Right, that's what we were taught. That's what the emphasis is on. Well, I'm here to tell you that that is not what you should emphasize. That is not what the emphasis is on. You were misled. The emphasis properly should be on that man is formed from the dust of the ground. Man is formed from the dust of the ground. That is what is important in this verse, okay? So go back and watch the videos that I posted over the last, I guess, 2 weeks or so. And this will make sense to you Okay, so you have something to do. You have a homework assignment. All right, now let's go back to our article and get started. Now, I did this review because this relates directly to being Black is a crime. Okay, the House of Yasharallah is a nationality. Okay, there are 16 nationalities presented to us in these documents, right? There's 16 nationalities. All right, so each of those nations are families, right? They're families, okay? So families are nations, and connect the dots. These families were created from the dust of the ground. You are standing at the door. You are standing at the door of the most profound information that you could possibly come into contact with as it relates to you returning to the Most High. All right. So figure it out. Keep watching the videos and figure it out. Okay. All right. So here we go. Let's get into this article. This is a really nice article. It's an easy read, and it doesn't explain the Black codes themselves, but it goes into the effect of the Black codes in the daily life of the people. Okay, now we must remember, scholars, always remember that law and history are connected. Law and history are connected. Okay, so keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. The Black codes and why they still matter today. The Black codes still impact policing and prison in the 21st century. Well, this title and subtitle, they're misleading. Okay, well, they do impact policing and prison today, right? But they impact you and I more powerfully and consistently, right? It impacts us in an extremely toxic and extremely toxic way, destructive way. Okay, so let's get into this. All right, so keep in mind, this is about you and your family, not about policing and the prison system. These are tools, institutions that have been developed and used to destroy you because you deny your ancient foremothers and forefathers. Okay, now that's why. Up to you to find out the details, because I've been posting videos on this, so you need to go back and do this research. Okay, this goes directly back to Deuteronomy chapter 28. Okay, all right. The solution should be clear. How to improve your life should be clear without even going into this article, shouldn't it? If you know the cause of the problem, you just reverse the cause, or you eliminate the cause, right? And then that's the perfect solution. All right, so let's get into this. This article was written by Nadra Kareem Niddle and updated on the December 21st, 2020. So let's get into the article. All right, so here we go. It's hard to understand why Black people are incarcerated at higher rates than other groups without knowing what the Black codes were. These restrictive and discriminatory laws criminalized Black people after enslavement and set the stage for Jim Crow. Now, those of you scholars who are in our class, Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 20 should come to your mind immediately, all right? They are also directly linked to today's prison industrial complex. Given this, a better grasp of the Black codes and their relationship to the 13th Amendment, the 13th Amendment, the original 13th Amendment, has a provision in there saying that these so-called Black people will never be citizens. Go search it yourself, okay? Go search it yourself. Given this, a better grasp of the Black codes and their relationship to the 13th Amendment provides a historical context for racial profiling, police brutality, and uneven criminal sentencing. Now, notice they purposefully left out that you can never become a citizen, okay? So don't take my word for it. Go research this, and you'll see that in the original 13th Amendment, it says that these so-called people of African descent can never be citizens, all right? You Black people. So let's continue. For far too long, Black people have been dogged by the stereotype that they're inherently prone to criminality, all right? So they're programming not only the people, these Black people, but also the other people who are watching TV and who are being trained in the school systems, right? And who are being influenced in their communities, right? And what's the idea? The idea is that Black people are inherently criminals, okay? In other words, they're born to be criminals, right? That's their character. This is what the training and the education teaches. All right, so let's continue. The institution of enslavement and the Black codes that follow reveal how the state essentially penalized Black people just for existing. So state this in another way, what is it? Being Black is a crime. Being Black is a crime in the US, okay? It is a federal and a state crime, all right? So let's continue with this article. Enslavement ended, so slavery ended, but Black people weren't truly free. Now, are there any Black people in the 16 nations that are listed in scripture? Okay, that's Genesis chapter 10. So let's go take a look at that. Let's see if we see any Black people listed in the table of nations. Well, better yet, well, we can do it. All right. So Genesis chapter 10, we're going to search for Black people in the table of nations. Okay. So let's start with Genesis chapter 10:1. This is the account of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's sons, who themselves had sons after the flood. Those sons are the nations, right? There were 16 total. Okay, so the sons of the Japhethites. The sons of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Trias. All right. The Hamites, the sons of Ham, were Cush, Put, and Canaan. So far, we don't see Black people, do we? Or Blacks. Okay, so now we're at 11. Japheth had 7. I believe it was 7. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, Japheth has 7. Ham had 4. Shem has 5. The Shemites, forget this Semite stuff, okay? No such thing as Semites. All right, the Semites. Sons were also born to Shem, so that would be Shemites, right? Would be Shemites, whose older brother was Japheth. Shem was the ancestor of the son of Eber. Okay, so Hebrew is a corruption of Eber, or Ivri is a corruption of Eber, right? Okay, all right. So let's look at the sons of Shem. Elam, Ashar, Apaksad, Lud, and Aram. That's 5. Okay, so that's the 16 nations that came out of Noah's 3 sons. There is no Black son of Ham, Shem, or Japheth, right? So there are no black people. Black is not a nation. It is an adjective. Etymologically, it means bleached out, pale. All right, so get your vocabulary together, right? Use proper words and their proper meaning. Okay, stop using connotative linguistics. All right, so let's continue with this article. So slavery ended, but black people, no such thing as black people as we just saw. Okay, correlate that back to Genesis chapter 2, Exodus chapter 20, verse 12, Deuteronomy 28. There's no black people, all right? I'm sorry, let me go back and read this. So enslavement ended, but black people weren't truly free. During Reconstruction, the period that followed the Civil War, African Americans in the South continued to have work arrangements and living conditions nearly indistinguishable from those they had during enslavement. Because the cost of cotton was so high at this time, planters decided to develop a labor system that mirrored servitude. According to America's History to 1877, Volume 1, we read this quote here. On paper, emancipation had cost the slave owners $3 billion. The value of their capital investment in former slaves, notice that, the value of their capital investment in former slaves, these were who? Black people, okay? A sum that equaled nearly 3/4 of the nation's economic production in 1860. So here we see this is about money. The real losses of planters, these were slave owners, however, depended on whether they lost control of their former slaves. Understand that. The real losses, so there's losses on paper, right? It's just on paper. It's not what you actually lose. Real losses are what you physically lose, okay? The real losses of slave owners, however, depended on whether they lost control of their former slaves. So if they lose control, or the degree of loss of control of these Black people is what? That's going to represent how much money they're going to lose. Why? Because they'll have to pay these Black people, okay? They'll either have to pay them a good salary or next to nothing. Nothing would be back to slavery, right? So it would be next to nothing on the low end and a good salary on the high end, okay? All right, so the real losses of slave owners, however, depended on whether they lost control of their former slaves. Planters attempted to reestablish that control and to substitute low wages for the food, clothing, and shelter that their slaves had previously received. So what that's saying is that, okay, during slavery, they got nothing. Okay, well, it's not slavery, right? Slave goes back to Slav. Okay, so the Black people definitely are not Slavs, okay? Those are hybrid Europeans. So what was this? This was forced servitude. They're in a state of forced servitude, prisoners of war, concentration camps. They receive no pay, okay? So when you look at the etymology of words, you can understand more fully the meaning, okay? You can understand what's really happening here. All right, so this was a condition of forced servitude in concentration camps. Okay, that's very different from slavery, if you understand that, okay? Planters attempted to reestablish that control. What is that control? Planters wanted to have what? As close to free labor as possible and as close to 100% over the life and death and quality of life of these so-called Black people, okay? Planters attempted to reestablish that control and to substitute low wages for the food, clothing, and shelter that their slaves had previously received. They also refused to sell or rent land to Blacks, hoping to force them to work for low wages, right? So in other words, if they have their own land, they can grow their own food and they can be independent. Okay, that also applies today, doesn't it? You have your own, you don't need someone and they can't control you. All right, so let's continue to the next paragraph. The enactment of the 13th Amendment only amplified challenges of African Americans during Reconstruction. So now here we see this modern term, African Americans. I think this, if I remember correctly, came about in the 1980s. So African Americans and Black people, they're using synonymously, okay? So now there's no African American nation in Genesis chapter 10, is there? So what are these? Black, African American, these are tags or brands. They have no link to the human family. They have no link to the human family. All right. Passed in 1865, this amendment ended the enslavement economy, but it also included a provision that would make it in the South's best interest to arrest and imprison Black people. So the federal government did this to the Black people. It was the US Congress that enacted the 13th Amendment. And the purpose of the 13th Amendment was to do what? Create a situation where these slaveholders could hold prison over the Black people's head to force them to work for basically free. In other words, basically free means a little bit of nothing, and to give the slave owners, the plantation owners, complete control over the Black people's lives. So it was the US government who did that, okay? They are the US Congress, okay, passed that, all right? And then the states implemented it. All right, so let's continue. Let me read this again. Passed in 1865, the 13th Amendment ended the enslavement economy, but it also included a provision that would make it in the South's best interest to arrest and imprison Black people. That's because the amendment prohibited enslavement and servitude, quote, except as a punishment for crime, unquote. Except as a punishment for crime. This provision gave way to the Black codes, which replaced the slave codes and was passed throughout the South the same year as the 13th Amendment. So what do we see here? This is an example of what? This is an example of what? Creating or social engineering, creating a society, right? Creating conditions to produce the type of society that you want. Okay, so this is social engineering taking place, okay? This is an example of social engineering. Why is this? Because the government and the elites, the financial people, the people who were running finance, they projected that the economy, or they had determined that the economy should move from an agricultural economy into an industrial economy. So therefore, because there was no longer going to be a need for an agricultural economy. They shifted the institution of so-called slavery or first forced servitude concentration camp into prison camps, which are also concentration camps, okay? And what happens in prisons? They force you to work for corporations for free or almost free, right? For almost free, and that's going on today. So as the economy shifts from right now, from the industrial to the computer age, and now to what? This new economy that's coming with artificial intelligence. They don't need you. They don't need you, meaning they don't need you to be alive. So what do you think they're going to do to you? Based on, not your opinion, based on the history of the United States corporation. What do you think they're going to do to you? Do you think they're going to have some compassion on you? Or do you think that they're going to do whatever they think they need to do to create the society that they want? So artificial intelligence means that jobs that were formerly done by people can be done by machines. Okay, so are they going to increase the number of prisons? Of course. Are they going to increase the number of crimes, petty crimes that they can categorize as a felony? Of course. Are they going to create situations where people can be killed off? Of course. And why do I say of course? Because there's historical precedent as we're reading. So let's continue. We'll start here. This provision gave way to the Black codes, which replaced the slave codes and was passed throughout the South the same year as the 13th Amendment. The codes, excuse me, heavily infringed on the rights of Black people and, like low wages, functioned to trap them in an enslavement-like existence. Well, guess what, folks? The Black people, this sentence is not true. This is not a true sentence. The Black people had no rights. Okay? The Black people had and still have no rights. Black people do not have human rights. Okay? And at this time, there was no 14th Amendment. So the Black people did not even have privileges. All right? So, should you identify yourself as Black or African American? They're synonyms. Black people have no human rights. They're not attached to the human family. They're outside of Genesis chapter 10, right? The human family goes back to Genesis chapter 2. Okay? So the Black people did not even have privileges at this point. All right? So the U.S. corporation, the slave masters, slave owners, the financiers were acting lawfully. All right, let's move on to the next sentence. The codes were not the same in every state, but overlapped in a number of ways. For one, they all mandated that Black people without jobs could be arrested for vagrancy. So what's the probability that we will see this again? The laws required, it mandated that the Black people without jobs could be arrested for vagrancy. The Mississippi Black codes in particular penalized Black people for wanton in conduct or speech, neglecting job or family, handling money carelessly, and all other idle and disorderly persons. Let's read this again. Let's read this again. The Mississippi codes in particular penalized or what? Criminalized. The Mississippi codes criminalized Black people for being wanton in conduct or speech. That means if someone who was a citizen of the United States didn't like what you said, or they didn't like what you behaved as a Black person, that's criminal behavior. Okay? It's criminal behavior. All right? If they accuse you of neglecting your job or your family, that's criminal behavior. If they accuse you of handling your money carelessly, that's criminal behavior. What business is it of anyone on how you spend your money, right? Or your speech, what business of that, right? There's supposed to be freedom of speech, but the Black people don't have access to that right. Okay, y'all notice that? Freedom of speech, Black people don't have access to that. All right. And all other idle and disorderly persons. Okay, so this is completely subjective. So in order for you not to be idle, that means you need to be working for them at whatever wage and in whatever situation, regardless how dangerous or unhealthy it might be, you need to be working for them in order for you to be not idle, or in order for you to be active, okay? All right, so you don't even have a right not to work if you don't want to as a Black person. All right, so how exactly does a police officer, and they're not police officers, right? They are highwaymen. How exactly does a highwayman decide how well a person handles money or if he's wanton in conduct? Clearly, many of the behaviors punishable under the Black codes were completely subjective. Okay, now why is that completely subjective? Why? Because Black people don't have any rights and they don't have any privileges. But their subjective nature made it easier to arrest and round up Black people. Y'all see that? So the US government, using the 13th Amendment, wanted to make it as easy as possible to arrest you and to round you up as Black people. Why? Because they wanted you to go to jail, to prison, so that you can then work for the corporation. Okay, work for the corporations. All right. Not because they didn't like you or not because they don't like you. That's not why. Okay, it's all about the economics. And what? Your status, your status. All right. Anyone who willfully identifies as a black person after hearing even just this article, I think you should rethink your decision because that's crazy, right? It's crazy to self-identify as a Black person. In fact, a variety of states concluded that there were certain crimes for which only Black people could be duly convicted. There were certain crimes that only Black people could be convicted, according to the Angela Y. Davis Reader. Okay. Therefore, the argument that the criminal justice system works differently for Black and white people. Now, there's no such thing as white people. White is a status. Black is a status. Go back, do some research, and you'll find out who these white people really are. Okay, because they're not the hybrid European. Therefore, the argument that the criminal justice system works differently for Black and white people can be traced back to the 1860s. So what this is saying is that the criminal justice system is still acting on the black codes. The black codes are still in effect. That's what this person just said in a very ambiguous way. Okay, the black codes are still in effect. How do you know? Because of the different way that the criminal justice system treats the black people compared to the hybrid European. All right, let's continue. And before the black codes criminalized black people, the legal system deemed freedom seekers as criminals for stealing property themselves. So who's the property? Black people. So to try to escape slavery, or not slavery, but to try to escape from the concentration camp, you'd be charged with theft. Theft of what? Theft of yourself, okay? This is your status and what you can expect as Black people. Okay, so should you continue to identify as Black people, or should you find your nationality and then proclaim that nationality according to what? According to Exodus chapter 20, verse 12, right? And you guys can go back and search that on your own. Honor your foremothers and forefathers. All right, fines, forced labor, and the Black codes. Violating one of the Black codes required offenders to pay fines. Y'all get that? Does that sound familiar? Violating one of the Black codes requires offenders to pay fines. Think about problems that you have in your family, or when you break up. They get you involved in children and family services and so on and so forth, and now you have to pay, right? Well, here we are. Now you can see where this stuff is coming from, where it has origins. Since many Black people were paid low wages during Reconstruction or denied employment, coming up with the money for these fees proved impossible. How many of the Black men are in prison because of child support? Inability to pay meant that the county court could hire out Black people to employers until they worked off their balances. In other words, until they worked off those debts. Same thing is happening today. Black people who found themselves in this unfortunate predicament usually did such labor in an enslavement-like environment. Okay, so when you go to prison, they make you work. So all of these Black women who are having their Black baby's father arrested for child support are helping to execute and implement the Black codes on their own children, because their son will grow up and very likely be in prison for the same thing by his girlfriend or his child's mother. Okay, they're gonna repeat this toxic, cyclical, generational behavior. So you hear a lot of talk about teenage pregnancy and stop the cyclical behavior, right? Well, what about stopping the cyclical, toxic behavior of Black women putting Black men in prison for child support, right? What about correcting and fixing these relationships, okay? One of the first things you can do is find out who you are, return to the Most High, and get out of this Black mentality and lifestyle and value system, okay? All right, so next paragraph. The state determined when offenders worked. The state determined when offenders worked, for how long they worked, and what kind of work was to be performed. This is the same thing happening in the prison. Private prisons and corporate contracts with prisons, and then the inmates are doing the work for almost nothing. More often than not, African Americans were required to perform agricultural labor. So in prisons today, they're performing all kinds of labor, right? They make clothes, they make boots. All of these prisons, they have contracts with private corporations. just as they had done during the period of enslavement. Because licenses were required for offenders. Offenders are what? The criminals, the Black people. Because licenses were required for the Black people to perform skilled labor, few did. With these restrictions, Black people had little chance to learn a trade and move up the economic ladder once their fines were settled. Let's read that again. Black people had little chance to learn a trade. Haven't the trades been taken out of the schools since what? Maybe the 1990s, they took the trades out of the schools? Black people had little chance to learn a trade and move up the economic ladder. Now we see why. Why? Because the more money that the Black people have, the better the ability or the more able they are to pay the fines. Now, if they can pay the fines like child support, okay, traffic tickets, so on and so forth, if they can pay those, they don't have to go to prison. Well, the corporations are going to lose, right? So it's better to either reduce their salaries, keep them unemployed, or what? Make sure that the dollar doesn't go as far. Make sure that the fines are high. Make sure that they're paying high rent, okay? In other words, keep them broke, either by reducing their salaries or increasing the amount of money they need to pay out. That'll keep them in prison, okay? And that'll keep a steady supply of labor, which will what? Reduce the cost of labor for the company owners or the corporations. And then the elites at the top, they earn more money. The stockholders of the companies earn more money, right? At the cost of Black people. All right, who have no rights to this day. And they could not simply refuse, they are the Black people. And the Black people could not simply refuse to work off their debts, as that would lead to a vagrancy charge, resulting in more fees and forced labor. So again, with this issue about child support, they can't refuse it, right? They're going to be charged with contempt of court. Okay, more fees, right? And a longer prison sentence. Under the Black codes, all Black people, convicts or not, under the Black codes, all Black people, convicts or not, were subject to curfews set by their local governments. Doesn't that sound interesting? Think about the pandemic, small businesses being closed down, everybody put on lockdown, no money, okay? Even their day-to-day movements were heavily dictated by the state. Black farm workers were required to carry passes from their employers. And meetings Black people took part in were overseen by local officials. Okay, this would be what? COINTELPRO in our day, right? This even applied to worship services, COINTELPRO again. In addition, if a Black person wanted to live in town, they had to have a white person as their sponsor. Any Black people who skirted the Black codes would be subject to fines and labor. Today, what does that mean? You get shot down in the street. In short, in all areas of life, Black people lived as second-class citizens. Let's state this more accurately. In all areas of life, Black people were criminals. Or in all areas of life, Black people are criminals. They were emancipated on paper, but certainly not in real life. Okay, let's continue. A civil rights bill passed by Congress in 1866 sought to give Black people more rights. Well, that's not true because they had no rights, right? So this civil rights bill sought to give Black people rights. The bill permitted them to own or rent property. but it stopped short of giving Black people the right to vote. It did, however, allow them to make contracts and bring their cases to court. Zion Law School scholars, you should understand or have a deeper insight on this right to contract, okay? You should have a deeper understanding of this right to contract. Let's discuss this just briefly. The right to contract is in the US Constitution, right? It's in there. It is considered a natural right. It is a natural right. And it goes right back to Genesis chapter 2. Okay? This is a divine principle that comes straight out of the first 5 books of the Bible, the right to contract. Black people don't have that right. Why? Because they deny their ancient foremothers and forefathers. Exodus chapter 20, verse 12, Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. They're not part of the human family. It did, however, allow them to make contracts and to bring cases before the court. That is a natural right that they don't have. It also enabled federal officials to sue those who violated the civil rights of Black people. Now, again, why civil rights? Because they don't have human rights. Why? Because they denied their ancient foremothers and forefathers, which is Exodus chapter 20, verse 12, Genesis chapter 10, and Genesis chapter 2. Okay? All of this is what? If you're Yasharallah, okay, I'm speaking for the house of Yasharallah, not for the other 15 nations. If you're Yasharallah, that means Yasharallah in English, they say Israelites, okay? So if you're an Israelite, if you're Yasharallah, and you are not following the Most High's instructions, his commandments, then you're in the curses, right? You're in the curses, okay? And you have no human rights if you deny your ancestor Yasharallah. All right, so let's continue. But Black people never reaped the benefits of the bill because President Andrew Jackson vetoed it. All right, so that didn't work out. So that was a disappointment for the Black people. So the house of Yasharallah, you must return to the Most High. You must follow his instructions, okay? You must follow his instructions, all right? So stop identifying as Black people because it's disrespectful to your mothers and fathers. Okay, it is disrespectful to your mothers. Imagine if your child started saying that they were not your child, but that they came from pigs, or that they came from cows, or that some hybrid European was their parent. Okay, and they lived their lives in such a way that you didn't teach them. Imagine how you would feel about that, right? You feel totally disrespected, okay? Maybe even disgusted, right? So it's the same thing. Honor your ancient foremothers and your ancient forefathers, that you may live a long time in the land that the Most High is giving you. Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. Let's continue with our reading. While the president's decision dashed the hopes of Black people, their hopes were renewed when the 14th Amendment was enacted. Note, okay, notice this. The 14th Amendment gave Black people even more rights than the Civil Rights Act of 1966 did. So it gave them more civil rights. Civil rights are not human rights. Civil rights are privileges given by the government, or the corporation rather. Human rights are those rights that you are vested with by the Most High that cannot be taken away. See how they're playing the black people? All right, so the 14th Amendment declared the black people and anyone born in the United States to be citizens. This is different from an Article 4 citizen, okay? So in the US Constitution, there's two citizenship statuses, one federal, one state, all right? And this is the worst one. So 14th Amendment citizenship status, this is civil rights, not natural rights, all right? In short, these are privileges that can be taken away from you by the US corporation. All right, so although the 14th Amendment did not guarantee black people the right to vote, it gave them equal protection of the laws. Okay, it gave them equal protection of the laws. The 15th Amendment, passed in 1870, would give black people suffrage. All right, so y'all should see something is wrong with this, right? So something is severely wrong with this. You get civil rights, but you don't have the right to vote, right? All right, so who in their right mind, who with the healthy sense of self would think that this is something good and to be proud of? All right, but people listen to how this is promoted as something wonderful and great on the news and in the schools. But this is a slap in the face. This is worse than a slap in the face. This is a spit in the face. It's even worse than that if you know who you really are. And if you honor your ancient foremothers and your ancient forefathers. And that's the way out of this problem for black people. That's the perfect solution. The end of the black codes. By the end of the 1860s, many Southern states repealed the black codes and shifted their economic focus away from cotton farming and onto manufacturing. They built schools, hospitals, infrastructure, and asylums for orphans and the mentally ill. Why? Why did they do this? Because they wanted to shift populations into big cities, right? They wanted to create big cities to support the corporations' labor needs, right? Have everyone in big cities, and then the corporation would be nearby, and it's easy for the corporation to have access to employees. So you see, you have a whole system of exploitation here, right? Okay, so now let's go through this more. They built schools, hospitals, infrastructure, and asylums for orphans and the mentally ill. Although the lives of black people were no longer dictated by the black codes, yes, they were. They lived, remember, on paper they weren't, but in real life they were, and they are. Although the lives of black people were no longer dictated by the black codes, they lived separately from white people and had fewer resources for their schools and communities. They also faced intimidation by white supremacist groups, such as the Ku Klux Klan, when they exercised their right to vote. So who do you think they were using to build the schools, the hospitals, the infrastructure like roads, sewage systems, the asylums, right? Who do you think that they used to build all of this stuff? They used the black people, right? They used the black people using the same black codes, all right? You don't do what we say, you go to jail and you're gonna work anyway, all right? And if you don't play ball, they're going to add more fines onto you, right? If you object, they're going to add more fines onto you, put you in prison longer. This is the black codes even today. The economic woes black people face led to an increasing number of them to be incarcerated. That's because more penitentiaries in the South were built along with all the hospitals, roads, and schools. Okay, so now they're using black people to build penitentiaries for their sons, brothers, mothers, and daughters to be put in. Okay, and the Black people continue to go along with this. Strapped for cash and unable to get loans from banks, formerly enslaved people worked as sharecroppers or tenant farmers. This involved working other people's farmland. Wait a minute. Those other people didn't own any land, right? They had possession of the land, but who are the real owners of the land? Who are the real owners of the land? Moors. Watch the videos that I've uploaded over the last week or two, and you can find out why that is. Moors and the house of Yasharallah are Moors, and you've been had, Moor, Israelite, you've been tricked out of your land, and you agreed to be called Black. This involved working other people's farmland in exchange for a small cut of the value of the crops grown. That's called getting played, right? You're getting pimped. That's your land, but you've agreed to be called Black, African American, everything else, okay? And instead of you having all income and control over the land, you've accepted the position of sharecropping, getting little to nothing. You've been played. Wake up. Wake up, return to the Most High. Sharecroppers frequently fell prey to shopkeepers. These would be who? These are still these former slave owners, okay? Planters. So sharecroppers or Black people frequently fell prey to the slave owners, concentration camp owners, who offered them credit, but charged them exorbitant interest rates on farm supplies and other goods. Democrats at the time made matters worse. Okay, so now this is the political system making matters worse. How? By passing laws that allow merchants. Who are the merchants? These are the slave owners, the concentration camp owners, and their suppliers, the corporations. Democrats at the time made matters worse by passing laws that allowed the merchants to prosecute sharecroppers who couldn't pay their debts. Y'all understand that? They sell you, force you into working your own land, and you don't know it's your own land. Okay, they pay you little to nothing, and then they charge you huge prices for supplies you need just to work that land and have something to eat. Okay, and they overcharge you on the credit, on the interest, so that it'll what? Take all your money plus some, so that you owe them. And if you don't pay, guess what? They can take you to court and put you in jail. And you go through that whole system, all right? You get cycled through that whole system, all right? So they control your life. All right, indebted African-American farmers faced imprisonment and forced labor unless they toiled on the land according to the instructions of the merchant creditor, the concentration camp owners, the slave owners, and their corporate suppliers and minions, okay? This quote was taken from the America's History, okay, America's History. Increasingly, merchants and landlords cooperated to maintain this lucrative system. Y'all hear that? Increasingly, merchants and landlords, that's the place where you live. You had to pay them rent, right? And that's even your place. by birthright. Increasingly, merchants and landlords cooperated to maintain this lucrative system. See, it's about money. It's not about you or anybody hating you or disliking you. It's about using you and those things that naturally and rightfully belong to you, taking your stuff and making money off of you, like you're an animal. That's all it is. Increasingly, merchants and landlords cooperated to maintain this lucrative system, and Zion Law School scholars correlate this with Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 21. Okay, we went through that last class. All right, and many landlords became merchants. The formerly enslaved people had become trapped in the vicious cycle of debt peonage. All right, debt peonage. What is this? Debt peonage. Y'all should look that up. Okay. Which tied them to the land and robbed them of their earnings. So the creditor is always master, and the debtor is always what? The servant. Okay, or connotatively, the slave. Angela Davis laments the fact that Black leaders of the time, such as Frederick Douglass, did not campaign to end forced labor and debt peonage. Why? Why didn't he do so? Most likely because he was a part of the system, right? He was, what did they call those people? The unsuspected. Those people who you don't suspect to be against you or working against you, but they are. Most likely, Frederick Douglass was one of those people, okay? That's why he didn't say anything about this prison system and debt peonage, okay? It wasn't his role, okay? And he was benefiting from it. If he was what they said he was, why didn't he campaign against it? The only logical explanation is that he was really on their side, pretending to be like he's on yours, just like today. Douglass primarily focused his energies on bringing an end to lynching. All right, he focused on bringing an end to lynching. He also advocated for Black suffrage. Davis asserts that Douglass may not have considered forced labor a priority due to the widespread belief that incarcerated Black people must have deserved their punishment. How did this become a widespread belief? Through social engineering, right? Through the education system and through the laws. What did the laws do and the enforcement of those laws? It gave evidence, right? By arresting the Black people, making them look poor, keeping them ignorant, uneducated, unemployed, made them look ignorant, okay? It made them look ignorant, and it made them also look like what? Like criminals, because why else would they be harassed and arrested and hauled off to jail? This was the thinking, right? And then that's supported by the educational institutions. So we have to be a suspect of this Frederick Douglass guy, all right? This is more of a reason to campaign against the prison system and debt peonage, right? Isn't that the case? That was the issue of the day, but Frederick Douglass ran from it. But he's put in our face like he's a hero, okay? But Black people complained that they were frequently jailed for offenses for which white people were not. You hear the Black people saying this even today. They were saying this in the 60s, the 70s, all the way up into 2022. The Black people are still saying this. Why? Because the Black codes are still in force. In fact, white people usually eluded prison for all but the most egregious crimes. We see that today. This resulted in Black people jailed for petty offenses. We see that today, right? Victimless crimes, marijuana, jaywalking. This resulted in Black people jailed for petty offenses being incarcerated with dangerous white convicts. All right. So you see that they put the Black person, you, your son, your mother, in harm's way by putting harmless people, honest people, in the same room and environment as these dangerous hybrid convicts. Okay. Why? Because you're property. All right, so Black women and children were not spared from prison labor. Y'all hear that? Black women and children were not spared from prison labor. And that's on the rise too right now, today, right? And it has been. Children as young as 6 years old were forced to work. And women in such predicaments were not segregated from male inmates. So let me ask you a question. Is this because they hate you? Or is this because it's all about money and it's not about you? Okay. It's not about money. I mean, I'm sorry, it's not because they hate you. It's all about money. And Black people are considered to be property, animals, cows and sheep, to be sheared and led to the slaughter. This made them vulnerable to sexual abuse and physical violence from both convicts and guards. What do they care? Because it'll produce another baby. Then that baby is going to grow up in a house or in an environment, a situation where the baby is going to have issues and most likely wind up in prison. So they have more labor. All right. After taking a trip to the South in 1888, Douglass witnessed firsthand the effects of forced labor on the Black people there. It kept Black people, quote, firmly in a strong, remorseless, that's how vicious it was, y'all, remorseless and deadly grasp, a grasp from which only death can free them, he noted. And it's like this today. It's like that because the Black people are participating in their own demise. Okay. The Black people can get out of this by returning to the Most High, following his instructions. Okay. Honor your ancient foremothers and your ancient forefathers. By the time Douglass made this conclusion, peonage and convict leasing had been in effect for more than 20 years in certain places. So Douglass didn't do anything. 20 years went by and, you know, he's living it up, right? He's living it up. Took him 20 years before he would say anything. Not do anything, say anything. And in a short stretch of time, the number of Black prisoners grew rapidly. From 1874 to 1877, Alabama's prison population tripled. 90% of new convicts were Black. Y'all hear that? 90%, 90% of new convicts were Black. What is this telling us? This is telling us that 10% of the hybrid Europeans were so criminal, they were so criminal that they actually went to jail. So that 10% represents the most dangerous criminals. But what about those who were committing other crimes and petty crimes, right? What percentage of the population is that? 10% at this time were committing heinous crimes. Okay. We read that up in the article, right? That the white people would only get locked up for the most heinous of crimes. Okay, so that's 10% of them. All right, so crimes formerly considered low-level offenses such as cattle theft were reclassified as felonies. This ensured that impoverished Black people found guilty of such crimes would be sentenced to longer prison terms. Didn't we see that? Haven't we seen that, y'all, today? African-American scholar W.E.B. Du Bois was disturbed by these developments in the prison system. In his work, Black Reconstruction, he observed, quote, "The whole criminal system came to be used as a method of keeping Negroes at work and intimidating them. Consequently, there began to be a demand for jails and penitentiaries beyond the natural demand due to the rise of crime." Y'all see that? So they made a business out of this. The 13th and 14th Amendment are used to make a business out of putting Black people in prison. Why would you want to be Black if you don't have to? Legacy of the codes. Today, a disproportionate amount of Black men are behind bars. In 2016, the Washington Post reported that 7.7% of Black men between the ages of 25 years old to 54 years old were institutionalized. They were in prison, okay? Compared to 1.6% of white men. Okay, that's not double. Okay, that's like 7 times, right? Or 700 times, okay? The newspaper also states that the prison population has quintupled over the past 4 decades. That's over the past 40 years. What happened 40 years ago? What happened 40 years ago? 20 years ago would have been 2002. 20 years before that was what? Probably somewhere around 1982, something like that. What was happening then? Child support and private prisons. Okay. The newspaper also stated that the prison population has quintupled over the past 4 decades, and that 1 out of every 9 Black children has a parent in prison. Now, what percentage of that is due to child support? Has to be a lot, right? That's why they set it up that way. Many ex-convicts can't vote or get jobs after their release, increasing their chances of recidivism and trapping them in a cycle as relentless as debt peonage. A number of social ills have been blamed for the large number of Black people in prison. They failed to mention child support. So here's the list: poverty, single-parent homes, and gangs. It should be child support, right? In there, traffic stops, right? While these issues may be factors, the Black codes reveal that since the institution of enslavement ended, those in power have used the criminal justice system. Who's in power? The Congress, US Congress, US President, state governors, state Congress, corporations. Okay, when you say corporations, there are people who are running those corporations, right? Financial institutions. Okay, so all of these people have used the criminal justice system as a vehicle to strip Black people of their liberty. This includes the glaring sentencing disparities between crack and cocaine, right? Y'all remember that? A higher police presence in Black neighborhoods, and a bail system that requires those arrested to pay, and a bail system that requires those arrested to pay for their release from jail or remain incarcerated if they are unable to pay. I hope y'all see what's happening here, right? From enslavement onward, the criminal justice system has all too often created insurmountable hurdles for Black people. No, it's not the criminal justice system who's done this. This is the US Congress, the US president, state governments, corporations and corporate leaders, educational institutions, and those hybrids and those Black people who willingly support the system, knowingly or unknowingly, right? Isn't that the case? All right, so that's going to end our article. Okay, so I'm Dr. Yasafa from Zion Law School. Go to zionlawschool.org, all right, and order the 101 Ancient Ibaryath course, all right? Do that for me. It greatly helps me to continue to do what we do here at Zion Law School. Okay, so let me take you here. Go to zionlawschool.org, all right? It should come up soon. And also, you can check our YouTube page. You'll see the links for this in the description area of this video, all right? Go to zionlawschool.org, click on course offerings. All right, so when you go to course offerings, you're going to see the Hebrew self-study course where the course cursor is. It's purple. Click on that. You can see that this is a self-study course, so you can learn Ibaryath at home now. Okay, this is a powerful introductory course. It is powerful. It is intensive. It is, by intensive, I mean it's very, 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 very comprehensive. Okay, it's very comprehensive. You're gonna learn so much when you subscribe to this course, okay? You're gonna learn a whole lot more than I taught in the 8-week class. All right, so this is the Ibaryath self-study course, 101 Ancient Ibaryath. You can try it for one day. It's 113 videos. You can watch as many of the 113 videos as you can. And it's only $10 a month to subscribe. So that's basically free. So if you don't want to learn this, if you turn this down, that's you saying you're not interested in learning your own language. You're saying you're not interested in learning your own language, which, by the way, you need to learn this in order to fully return to the Most High. Why? Because you need to be able to understand and read these documents, interpret them on your own. So you don't have to rely on me or somebody else, but I'm going to prove that to you, okay? Hebrew self-study course. All right, so this has no doctrine. So if you're involved in a church or a camp or an assembly, there's no doctrine here. There's nothing to prevent you from whatever your doctrine is to from taking this course. This is going to help you in so many ways that I can't say right now, in every area of your life, even outside of your study of the scripture. This is going to help you throughout your life, okay, in all aspects, okay? So again, it's almost free. It's just $10 a month to subscribe, right? You can cancel anytime. So let me take you down here to, you can see the curriculum. But notice, okay, notice what we're going to cover. It's everything pictographs, everything culture, grammar, words. The word studies are phenomenal. I mean, the word studies are going to blow your mind. And it's 225 vocabulary words. There's so much there. This is jam-packed. It is jam-packed, okay? And I teach it in a way that's interesting, exciting, and fun. So scroll down, you'll see your trial, okay? Click on subscribe, all right? That's gonna get you started. Click on subscribe. And then after 24 hours, check your email, okay? Sometimes people who use, I think PayPal, depending on what your settings are on PayPal, it won't go into a recurring payment. PayPal may send you an email asking you if you want to subscribe. So check your email, or set your PayPal for recurring payments. This is cancel anytime. But I know you're not going to cancel. You're going to keep this for years and years and years. I'm sure of that. You're going to use this with your children, with your husband, with your wife, right? So you can see the curriculum. I'm not going to go through everything, but y'all go through this yourself. You can see all of the topics, okay? All of the topics we cover. And then the grammar is part 3. All right, so you'll see everything in here. So you see there's a lot of information in here. So go ahead and get this for yourself. This is the best thing. This is the best way to spend any money that you have, okay? It's less than what? Maybe less than a pack of cigarettes, right? I don't know how much cigarettes cost. I don't smoke anymore, but they used to be expensive. Or maybe less than 2 packs of cigarettes, right? So go ahead and do that. Okay, I'm Dr. Yasapa from Zion Law School. Make sure you take care of yourself, be good to yourself, be good to your family. Subscribe now. Shalom.